Emma Carter drove the nail through the horseshoe so hard the mule flinched. She didn't apologize. She never did. The women of Red Bluff called her mannish. The men called her worse. And every morning she woke up in that livery stable smelling of sweat and animal hide, she told herself the same thing: survive another day. She wasn't waiting to be chosen. She had stopped waiting for anything. If this story speaks to you, subscribe to our channel. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this tale travels and stay until the very end. The summer that changed Emma Carter's life arrived the same way everything else had in Red Bluff, Montana, without warning and without mercy. It was the kind of July heat that pressed down on a person like a hand flat against the back of the neck. Not warm, not gentle, punishing. The kind of heat that made horses irritable and men mean and women invisible, because in a town like Red Bluff, women who worked with their hands instead of their manners had long since learned to stop expecting to be seen. Emma had stopped expecting a lot of things. She was 28 years old, and she had the hands of a woman twice that, calloused at every knuckle, scarred along the left palm from a wire fence she'd grabbed barehanded at 14 to keep a spooked mare from bolting into the road. She'd held that wire until blood ran down her wrist and the horse settled. Nobody had thanked her. The horse's owner, a banker named Aldous Pratt, had looked at her the way men in Red Bluff always looked at Emma Carter, like she was something that had wandered into the frame of a photograph that didn't belong to her. She worked the livery stable on the south end of town, 12 hours a day, sometimes 14, mucking stalls, trimming hooves, resetting thrown shoes, loading panniers onto pack mules for the mining operations up in the hills. She was better at it than anyone in the county, and she knew it. The men who ran the surrounding ranches knew it too. They just didn't say so out loud, because saying so would have required acknowledging that Emma Carter was something worth acknowledging. And Red Bluff had made its decision about that a long time ago. She wasn't from money. She wasn't from a family that anyone in town respected. Her mother had died when Emma was 9. Her father had drunk himself hollow by the time she was 12 and spent the next 4 years making sure Emma understood in every way a man could make a child understand that she was a burden he hadn't chosen. When he finally fell from a wagon on a muddy road 3 miles outside of town, didn't get up. Emma had felt something she was still ashamed of. Relief. She'd been working the livery for 6 years after that. She'd learned everything she knew from watching, from doing, from getting kicked and thrown and knocked flat and getting back up because there was no one around to help her, and the horses still needed feeding regardless. She didn't hate Red Bluff. She'd just learned to expect nothing from it. Caleb Morgan came down from the mountain on the 3rd Tuesday of July. He didn't come down often. 4 times a year, maybe 5. Just long enough to buy what he needed, mule feed, gun oil, salt, sometimes rope, and get back to the tree line before the town had time to remember he existed. He'd been running traps on the upper slopes of the Bitterroot Range for going on 7 years. Before that, he'd ranched. Before that, he'd had a wife. Before that, he'd been a different man. He was 34 years old, and he looked older in the eyes. Not in his body. His body was still the body of a man who worked hard in hard country, lean and weathered, and capable of carrying more than any 2 men in Red Bluff put together. But his eyes had the quiet of someone who had already mourned the things most men hadn't even found yet. Her name had been Ruth. She'd been 26 when the fever took her 2 winters past. It had come on fast the way mountain illness always did, and by the time Caleb understood what was happening, there was nothing he could do except stay with her and be there at the end, which he was. He held her hand until it went cold. Then he walked outside, stood in the snow for a long time, and decided not to come down off the mountain again unless he had a reason that couldn't be argued with. He'd kept that decision for 2 years. He rode into Red Bluff that July morning on a bay gelding that had been his for 11 years, a horse so attuned to him they moved like one animal. He had a list in his shirt pocket. He meant to spend less than 3 hours in town. He did not expect anything to change. He heard the commotion before he reached the livery. Not a fight, not exactly. More like the particular sound a crowd makes when it has decided someone deserves what it's giving them. A low collective meanness. The kind of sound that had no sharp edges, but all the weight of stone. He tied his gelding at the post and walked toward it without hurrying, because Caleb Morgan had learned a long time ago that hurrying into other people's problems made them your problems, and he had enough of his own. There were 6 men gathered near the open doors of the livery stable. 4 of them he recognized by type if not by name, ranch hands, the kind who got louder in groups and quieter alone. The other 2 he knew, Aldous Pratt, the banker in his good coat despite the heat, and the man standing next to Pratt Dale Finch who ran the feed operation on the north side of town, and who had, by all accounts, Caleb had ever encountered the particular cruelty of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered to him. They were looking at something inside the stable. Caleb looked too. Emma Carter was standing in the middle of the livery with a hoof pick in one hand and a mule's foreleg braced between her knees. She was working. She hadn't stopped working. And the men were talking at her the way some people talk at weather, like it doesn't hear you, but you need to say it anyway. "You know this mule is only worth half what you charged me," Finch was saying. "I want the difference back." Emma didn't look up. "The mule is sound. I reset that shoe 2 weeks ago and it's been sound since. You want a refund? Talk to the man who rode it hard over shale." A couple of the ranch hands snickered. Finch's jaw tightened. "I'm talking to you, girl." "I noticed." She set the hoof down, straightened, and looked at him with the particular flatness of a person who has long since burned through all their available fear of a specific thing. "The answer's the same either way. You got no business running this stable," Pratt said. His voice was smooth. That was what Caleb had always disliked about Pratt, the smoothness of him. Men with rough edges were at least honest about their sharpness. "Town's been saying it for years. Woman can't manage animals the way a man can. It's just nature." "That mule disagrees," Emma said, "and so does every rancher who's brought me their problem horses for the last 6 years." "Every rancher who couldn't afford better," Finch said. She turned back to the next hoof. "Then go find better." Finch stepped forward. It wasn't a large step, but it was a particular kind of step, the kind a man takes when he wants the person he's talking to understand that he's capable of making this physical if he decides to. Caleb walked through the crowd. He didn't push anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He just moved through them the way a man moves through brush with the expectation that it's going to part, and the crowd parted because there was something in the way Caleb Morgan occupied space that made it clear he wasn't performing anything. He stopped between Finch and Emma. "Morning," he said, not to Finch, not to Pratt, to Emma. She blinked, looked at him. She hadn't heard him come in. He turned to Finch then, looked at him the way a man looks at a problem he's deciding whether or not to engage with. "You got business with this woman." "I got business with this stable," Finch said. "Which is my business, not yours." "The stable's her business," Caleb said. "Which makes it a little bit mine, since I need her to do something for me, and she can't do it if she's standing here talking to you." Finch stared at him. Pratt stared at him. The ranch hands shuffled. Caleb waited. He had infinite patience for this particular kind of standoff, because he understood that men like Finch calculated everything by the expected response. They pushed because they expected flinching. They talked loud because they expected quiet. The one thing they never knew what to do with was someone who simply didn't move. Finch moved. He took half a step back, recalibrated, glanced at Pratt. Then he straightened his coat and looked at Emma over Caleb's shoulder. "We'll finish this later." "We already finished it," Emma said. Answer was no. Finch left. Pratt followed and the ranch hands after him. The stable went quiet except for the animals. Emma looked at Caleb for a long moment. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect it. "What do you need?" she said. "3 mules. Pack ready. I need them able to carry weight at altitude above 8,000 feet. I'm heading back up into the Bitterroots." She set her hoofpick down on the rail and walked toward the far stalls without another word. He followed. She moved through the stable the way people move through places they know better than their own heartbeat. She checked each animal with her hands before her eyes, running her palms along flanks, pressing at haunches, lifting feet, checking eyes. She didn't narrate what she was doing. She just did it. "These three," she said, eventually stopping at a set of stalls. "The gray's got the best lungs. The dun's stronger, but he'll need shoeing before you take him above 6,000. He's starting to show wear on his right rear. The black mule's the one you want for difficult terrain. She's stubborn, but she plants." Caleb looked at the mules, then at Emma. "You're telling me the black's the best one. I'm telling you she'll be the last one standing if something goes wrong, which it will. It always does." He nodded slowly. "How much?" she told him. He reached into his coat for his money pouch. She was already walking toward the tack room. "I'll need a contract," she said over her shoulder. He stopped. "A contract. In writing. Terms of sale. Payment in full before they leave this stable." She came back with a ledger and a stub of pencil. "I've had men ride off with animals and renegotiate the price from the saddle. It happens once before you learn." He looked at the ledger, then at her. "You write contracts yourself." "I write everything myself." She set the ledger on the rail and looked at him steadily. "You have a problem with that?" "No," he said. And he meant it. She wrote. He watched her write. She had the handwriting of someone self-taught, deliberate, careful each letter, like something she'd decided on. She wrote the terms without hesitation. 3 mules descriptions, agreed price, date of payment. His name, her name. She slid it toward him. He read it. He signed it. She signed it, tore the page carefully along the spine, and handed him his copy. "Give me an hour with the Dunn's shoe," she said. He sat down on a hay bale and waited. "Bah!" She worked the Dunn's shoe without speaking to him. He didn't try to fill the silence. That was the thing about working alone for 7 years. You stopped being afraid of quiet. You stopped needing to pad it with noise. He watched her work. She was not a small woman. She was built the way people get built, when their life requires actual physical labor, solid through the shoulders, strong in the back, capable looking, in a way that had nothing to do with how people usually looked in Red Bluff. The town women he'd passed on the street today were corseted and careful. Emma Carter was neither. He found himself thinking, almost against his will, that she didn't look like anyone he'd seen in a long time. He pushed the thought away. He had come down for mules. He had mules. That was enough. But then she set down the Dunn's foot and straightened, and without looking at him, she said, "You're Caleb Morgan." It wasn't a question. "I am." "I heard about your wife." She picked up the next tool without looking up. "I'm sorry." He hadn't expected that. Most people in Red Bluff either didn't bring Ruth up at all, or brought her up with the particular discomfort of people who aren't sure what they're supposed to say. Emma said it the same way she did everything, directly, without ceremony. "Thank you," he said. "She came through here once. 3 years ago, maybe. She needed a mare reshod before she rode out to meet you." Emma glanced at him briefly. "She talked about you the whole time. Couldn't shut her up, honestly." Something moved through his chest. He kept his face still. "What did she say?" Emma thought about it. "She said you were stubborn as a mountain, but that you'd given her the first home she'd ever felt safe in." She set down the tool. "That's a good thing to be able to give somebody." He didn't answer for a moment. Then, "Yeah, I reckon it is." She looked at him, then really looked at him for just a second. The way you look at someone when you're trying to figure out if they're going to be a problem. Then she turned back to the work. The hour passed. The Dunn was ready. He paid her. Cash. Exact. She counted it without embarrassment, folded it, put it in her apron. He loaded his supplies onto the mules. She helped without being asked. She knew how to balance a load the way a person knows when you've done it 1,000 times, weight distributed, nothing that would shift knots that would hold at altitude. He was almost ready to go when he stopped. He didn't know afterward what made him do it. Something practical, he told himself. Something logical. He'd been thinking about it all hour. The truth was, and what he'd been thinking was, the mountain was harder than it used to be. The trap lines were longer. The packing was more work than 1 man and 3 mules could do efficiently. He'd managed because he'd had no reason not to manage. But managing wasn't the same as prospering, and he'd had enough of managing. He turned back towards Emma. She was already moving toward the next stall, already back in her work, already unnoticing him the way people get when they've learned not to wait to be noticed back. "Miss Carter," he said. She stopped, turned. "I have a proposition," he said, "and it's not a polite one, so I'll ask you to hear it out before you decide." She looked at him with that flat, waiting expression. "I'm listening. I'm running 6 trap lines above 8,000 feet. Beaver, mink, some fox. I process on site and bring the furs down in the fall. It's a 2-person operation that one person has been doing, which means I've been doing it wrong." He kept his voice level, factual. "I need someone who can handle animals at altitude, pack a load, and not fall apart when things go wrong." "You need a ranch hand," she said. "I need someone who knows mules," he said, "and horses, and who doesn't need to be managed or explained to or looked after." He paused. "From what I've seen this morning, that's you." She stared at him. "I'm offering you a season," he said. "Summer into fall. Equal share of the fur proceeds. You handle the animals, help run the lines, and I keep us provisioned and sheltered." He reached into his coat and held out his copy of the contract she'd written. "I'll sign whatever you want. Same terms as this, in writing. Notarized in town if that's what you need." Emma looked at the paper. She looked at him. "Equal share," she said. "Equal share." Why me? It was a reasonable question. He gave her a reasonable answer. "Because you didn't flinch when Finch stepped toward you," he said. "And because you knew which mule to recommend without selling me the expensive one. And because your wife said you gave her the first home she'd ever felt safe in, and Ruth didn't say things she didn't mean." Something crossed her face that he couldn't entirely read. "That's a strange reason to offer someone a season of work," she said. "I'm a strange man," he said. "But I keep my word. You can ask anyone in Red Bluff who's ever done business with me." She was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the stable breathed animals shifting flies, the distant sound of the town going about its morning. Emma Carter stood in the middle of it all, looking like someone doing a calculation she hadn't been expecting to make that day. "I'll need 2 days," she said finally, "to arrange cover for the stable." "I can give you 2 days, and I want the contract witnessed. Name your witness." She thought about it. "Judge Caldwell. He rides the circuit. He's in town until Friday." "Then we'll do it tomorrow," Caleb said. "First thing." She looked at him one more time, that long measuring look. "All right, Mr. Morgan," she said. He nodded, turned toward the door. "Mr. Morgan?" He stopped without turning. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. Not confrontational, just straight. The way she did everything. He was quiet a moment. Then he said the truest thing he could manage, which wasn't the whole truth, but wasn't a lie. "Because the mountain's quieter than it needs to be," he said. "And I'm done pretending that's good enough." He walked out. That night, Emma sat in her small room above the stable and looked at the contract she'd written that morning. Her name next to his. Terms in her own handwriting. She'd had harder choices in her life. She'd had easier ones, too. She thought about Finch, about Pratt, about 6 years of this town measuring her and finding her short. 6 years of being capable and being invisible at the same time, which was a particular kind of loneliness she'd never found words for. She thought about the way Caleb Morgan had walked through that crowd, not charging, not performing, just moving through it like it had already made up its mind to part, because he'd already made up his mind that it would. She thought about what he'd said. The mountain's quieter than it needs to be. She understood that. She folded the contract carefully and put it in her box under the floorboard where she kept the things that mattered. She told herself she was going for the money, for the share, for the chance to build something that didn't depend on this town's goodwill, which had never been given to her in the first place. That was true. That was all true. She didn't ask herself why, when she closed her eyes that night, she didn't feel dread. She felt something else. Something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten the shape of it. Something that felt quietly, like forward. The next morning, Aldous Pratt found out about the contract. He came to the stable before 7. He was alone this time, which Emma noted. Men like Pratt were bolder in private than in crowds, they just expressed it differently. "I heard you're going up the mountain with Morgan," he said. "That's correct." She was measuring grain. She didn't stop. "That's a mistake." "I reckon that's my mistake to make." "Emma?" He used her first name the way men like Pratt used first names to reduce. To remind you that you were small enough to be spoken to without the formality a real person deserved. "You have a business here, a life here. Whatever Morgan's offering you is more than this town ever has," she said. She set down the grain scoop and looked at him. "You've been banking on me having no options for 6 years, Mr. Pratt. You've been counting on it. Everybody here has." She picked up the scoop again. "I found an option." Pratt's jaw worked. "Morgan's not stable. He went up that mountain after his wife died and nobody's seen him but 4 times a year. Man like that is exactly the kind of man I understand," Emma said. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have work before we sign the papers." He left. She let out a slow breath she'd been holding since he walked in. Then she went back to measuring grain because the animals still needed feeding, and they didn't care about Aldous Pratt or Caleb Morgan or the particular earthquake that had begun, quiet as a fault line shifting in the life of Emma Carter. The signing happened in Judge Caldwell's office at 9 in the morning. Caldwell was a compact, careful man who'd been riding the Montana circuit for 20 years and had developed the particular impartiality of someone who'd seen everything and decided surprise was a waste of energy. He read the contract. He read it again. "Equal partnership," he said. "Fur proceeds split at completion of season. Either party may dissolve with 30 days' notice. Miss Carter retains all prior ownership of her livery business. Mr. Morgan provides shelter provisions and safety on the mountain." He looked up. "That about right?" "Yes, sir," Emma said. "It's legal," Caldwell said. He looked at Caleb. "You understand this is binding?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "She could take half your fur earnings and walk." "That's what I agreed to." Caldwell looked at Emma. "And you understand you're going up into the Bitterroots with a man you've known for approximately 24 hours. "I've known longer men less," Emma said. Caldwell almost smiled. He notarized the document, kept a copy, and handed them each their signed pages. Caleb tucked his into his shirt. Emma folded hers precisely and put it in her coat pocket. Outside, the summer sun was already hammering Red Bluff flat. The street was beginning to fill the morning bustle, the commerce, the ordinary daily noise of a town that had decided it knew what it knew. They stood on the board sidewalk for a moment. "We leave at first light tomorrow," Caleb said. "I'll be ready," Emma said. She turned to go. "Miss Carter." She stopped. "They're going to talk," he said. "The town. About what this looks like. They've been talking about what I look like my entire life," she said. "I stopped caring some time ago." She looked at him steadily. "Does it bother you?" He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. "No," he said. "I just wanted you to know I was aware of it." She held his eyes for a moment. Something passed between them that neither one would have known how to name. "First light," she said, and she walked back toward the stable through the town that had always looked at her sideways with something in her chest that was unfamiliar and not entirely uncomfortable. Something that felt like the first true beginning she'd had since she stopped expecting any. They left Red Bluff at first light the way Caleb had said they would. Emma was already at the stable door when he rode up her pack on the ground beside her, the 3 mules loaded and waiting. She had been awake since 3. Not from nerves, or not only from nerves, but because there was a particular quality to the last hours in a place you're about to leave that makes sleep feel dishonest. Like closing your eyes on something you should be looking at. She had looked at it. The stable. The small room above it. The 6 years of her life she was folding up and setting aside. Then she had picked up her pack and come downstairs. Caleb didn't comment on the fact that she was ready. He just looked at the mules, checked her loading work with his hands the way she'd checked it herself, and found nothing to correct. She watched him find nothing to correct, and felt something small and sharp. Not pride exactly. Closer to relief. The relief of being assessed accurately. "That's good packing," he said. "I know," she said. He almost smiled. She wasn't sure. They moved out through the edge of town in the gray pre-dawn, the mules strung together behind them, hooves quiet on the packed earth. The town was still sleeping. Emma didn't look back. She had made her decision, and she understood herself well enough to know that looking back at decisions made them harder to keep. The road north climbed almost immediately, leaving the flat valley floor behind, and beginning the long angled work of approaching the mountains. The bitter roots rose ahead of them like a promise no one had signed, enormous and impersonal and entirely indifferent to the two people moving toward them. Emma had never been this far north. She'd seen the mountains her whole life from the floor of the valley. The way you see things, you assume are for other people. She hadn't known they looked different up close. Not bigger exactly. More present. Like they were paying attention. Caleb rode without speaking. She matched his pace without asking. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. That surprised her. She had spent 6 years in rooms full of people who made her feel more alone than solitude ever had. And here was a man she'd known for 24 hours, whose quiet felt like something she could breathe in. She didn't examine that too closely. Not yet. After 2 hours of steady climbing, the trail narrowed and the scrub gave way to pine. The air changed thinner, cooler, carrying something clean that the valley air never had. The mules felt it too. Their ears came forward. Their stride shifted. Emma felt it in her lungs first, then in her chest. Something opening. "First time above the valley floor?" Caleb asked. He hadn't looked at her. "That obvious. You're breathing different." She was quiet a moment. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "It means you're paying attention. Most people spend the first hour fighting it. You just let it change you." She didn't know what to do with that, so she let it sit. They rode. Dawn. The first test came at midday. They'd made good time on the lower trail, but the path above the first ridge was rockier than anything Emma had worked before, loose shale and long shelves, the kind of terrain that punished careless footing. The gray mule, the one with the good lungs she'd selected herself, decided at the worst possible moment that she was done with loose rock and planted. Not a small plant, a full committed 4-hooved refusal, the kind that could hold up a train. Caleb stopped his horse and looked back. "Leave her," he said, not unkindly, practically. "She'll come when she's ready." "She'll come now," Emma said. She dismounted, handed her reins to Caleb without looking at him, and walked back to the gray mule. She didn't approach from the front. She came up alongside, pressed her shoulder against the mule's shoulder, and put her mouth close to the animal's ear. Nobody heard what she said, but the gray mule moved, not instantly. There was a moment, a long, dignified moment, in which the mule appeared to be deciding whether what Emma had said warranted compliance. And then she stepped forward, deliberate and certain, as if she'd intended to all along. Caleb watched this. Emma collected her reins and remounted without comment. They rode on. After a while he said, "What did you say to her?" "I told her the trail got easier past this section," Emma said. Which is true. She understood that. She understood the intention of it. Emma glanced at him. "Animals don't need the words. They need to know you mean what you're saying." He was quiet for a moment. "Ruth used to say something like that." Emma looked at him. "She said horses were just people who couldn't afford to be polite about what they were feeling," he said. "So they said it straight." Emma thought about that. "She was right," she said. He nodded, looked forward. And they rode on, and the mountain got closer, and the silence between them got a little warmer than it had been before, without either one of them doing anything to make it so. They made camp at the first plateau before dark. Caleb had done this before many times, and Emma watched how he set the order of things. Animals first. Always animals first. Food, water, hobbling, checking for soreness or injury from the day's climb. He worked through it fast and efficient, and she worked beside him matching his pace, and they had the mules settled in less than 30 minutes. She was impressed, though she didn't say so. Efficiency like that wasn't taught. It was built slowly through years of understanding that animals left to discomfort overnight cost you twice the time in the morning. He started a fire. She unpacked provisions. They ate without ceremony, dried meat hardtack, a tin of beans he heated over the flame. It wasn't comfortable food. It was fuel. She ate all of it. "You eat like someone who knows they need it," he observed. "I've gone without," she said. "I don't make that mistake anymore." He looked at her across the fire. "When?" "After my father died." She kept her voice even. "I was 16. The stable owner who hired me paid me in credit for a year before he paid me in cash, which meant I ate when there was something to eat and didn't when there wasn't." She looked at the fire. "You learn fast." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me what I needed to know." She glanced at him. "You grow up with money." "Some. Not much. My father ran cattle in Wyoming. Enough to be comfortable. Not enough to be easy." He turned the tin in his hands. "I left at 17. Wanted to find my own place." "Did you—" He looked up at the mountain they'd been climbing all day. "Yeah," he said. "I did." She followed his eyes. The mountain in the last light was something she didn't have words for. She wasn't going to try. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Before. The way things were." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I miss her. I don't miss who I was when I was afraid of losing her." He set down the tin. "When she was alive, I was always calculating disaster, always trying to stay ahead of the thing that would take her. Then it took her anyway, and I understood that all that calculating was just fear dressed up as planning." Emma looked at him. "I'm not afraid of much anymore," he said. "That's not as good a thing as it sounds." "Why not?" "Because fear keeps you connected," he said. "To things, to people. Without it you can do anything, but you stop caring about whether any of it matters." She was very still. "Does it?" she asked quietly. "Matter the mountain, the furs, any of it." He looked at her directly. "Ask me at the end of the season," he said. She held his eyes. "All right," she said. The fire burned between them, and the mountain held its breath, and neither one of them said anything else, and it was enough. The second test came on day 3. They'd made good progress. The upper camp was another full day's ride, but Caleb had a secondary line he wanted to check on the way a string of traps set 2 months ago along a creek drainage he called the Narrows. Emma came with him while the mules rested, the two of them moving on foot through the pines. The Narrows was aptly named. The trail, if it could be called that, ran along a creek between 2 rock walls close enough to touch on both sides, the creek itself running fast and cold over smooth stone. She moved through it behind him, without complaint. Her boots were good. Her footing was steady. They were checking the third trap when they heard the horse. Not Caleb's gelding, that horse was back at camp. This was something else. A horse moving fast in the timber above them, and fast in rough country, meant something wrong. Caleb had his rifle off his shoulder before Emma had processed what she was hearing. They came out of the Narrows and into the open, just in time to see the horse. A big chestnut, eyes wide and white-rimmed bridle gone moving at a panicked run across the slope above them, and behind the horse scrambling down through the rocks, a man. He wasn't moving well. He was favoring one side, and his shirt was dark at the shoulder. He went down on one knee, got up, went down again. Caleb moved. Emma moved faster. She didn't think it through. That was the thing about emergencies. The thinking happened after. Her body just went up the slope toward the falling man because a falling person needed to be stopped before they fell further, and she was closer. She reached him on the third fall. He wasn't old 30, maybe 35, with a beard going gray at the edges and a wound that was worse than the shirt made it look. He tried to get up when she reached him, and she put her hand flat on his chest. "Stop." she said. "You stop right now." He stopped. "Where are you hurt?" she said. "Shoulder," he managed. "Horse threw me. Rocks." He looked past her toward where the chestnut had gone. "My horse." "The horse is fine," she said with more certainty than she had. "You're not. Hold still." Caleb was there then, and he moved around to the man's other side, and they got him down to a sitting position, and Emma looked at the shoulder with the calm assessment of someone who had set bones and sewn flesh before on animals, if not on men, and understood the architecture of damage. "It's not bleeding through," she said to Caleb. "The rock cut him, but it didn't go deep. He's more shaken than hurt." "I'm Harlan Greer," the man said. He was working to pull himself together. She could see it, embarrassed by needing help the way men always were. "I run traps on the east drainage. My camp's 4 miles out." Caleb looked at him steadily. "Caleb Morgan. You know my lines?" "I know of them." Greer looked between them. "Didn't expect to run into anyone up here." "Neither did we," Emma said. She'd torn a strip from the hem of her work shirt without drama and was pressing it to the cut on his shoulder. "Hold that. Keep pressure on it." He held it. He looked at her. "You're not his wife," he said. Not rudely, just observational. "No," Emma said. "I'm his partner." Something about the word surprised her even as she said it. Not the content that was accurate, the contract said so, but the ease of it. The way it came out without hesitation or apology. Greer looked at Caleb. "You're running this operation with a woman." "I'm running this operation with the best animal handler in Red Bluff County," Caleb said. His voice was completely flat. "She found your horse, by the way." They all looked. Down the slope, moving slow now, the chestnut had circled back, and Emma had said nothing. Done nothing, hadn't even looked at the animal since Greer appeared. But the horse was moving toward them with a kind of careful directness that didn't make sense until you understood that horses, when they were afraid, looked for something solid. Emma was solid. They felt it. The chestnut came to within 10 feet and stopped blowing hard, looking at Emma. She extended her hand, didn't move toward it, just let it decide. The horse walked to her hand and dropped its head. Greer stared. "How did she do that?" he said. "She said something it believed," Caleb said. They helped Greer back to his camp, which turned out to be 3 miles east along the ridge, a rough but adequate setup, a man clearly comfortable on the mountain. He had a mule of his own, an old gray animal that came to Emma without being called, which she took as a good sign about Greer's character. He offered them coffee. They stayed an hour. Over the fire, Greer looked at Caleb with a directness that suggested he was about to say something he wasn't entirely sure would land well. "There's talk," he said. "Below, in the valley." Caleb didn't react. "There's always talk." "About Morgan's lines." Greer looked at his cup. "About someone wanting them." Emma went still. Caleb's hands, she noticed, did not move. "Who?" "Dale Finch." Greer looked up. "He's been buying up trap rights along the lower Bitterroot all spring. 2 men sold out. One of them says Finch made it clear selling was the better option." "Finch runs feed," Caleb said. "Finch runs more than feed now," Greer said. "He's partnered with someone from Helena, someone with money. They're talking about a fur processing operation, industrial scale. They need the mountain lines to make it work." He paused. "Your lines are the best on this range. You know that." "I know that," Caleb said. Emma looked at him. "Did you know about Finch before we left?" He met her eyes. "I knew he'd been buying. I didn't know how far." It wasn't an evasion. It was the truth. She could tell the difference by now, and it had only been 3 days, which told her something about how clearly he meant the things he said. "He can't take your lines if you're working them," she said. "He can make it hard to work them," Greer said quietly. The fire crackled. Above them, the mountain made none of its own comments. "What kind of hard?" Emma asked. Greer looked at his shoulder. "The kind that looks like accidents," he said. "My horse didn't throw me because of rough ground. She was spooked. and the thing that spooked her came from the wrong direction for it to be natural. He looked at Caleb. "I think someone's been through my camp." The silence that followed had weight. Emma looked at Caleb. She was doing the math, the kind of math you did when you understood that the situation you'd stepped into had dimensions you hadn't been shown before you signed. She wasn't angry. She was calculating. "You should have told me this before we left town," she said. "I didn't know this part," he said. "I knew Finch was buying. I didn't know he was willing to push it this far." "Does it change anything for you?" she asked. Direct, straight, the way she did everything. He looked at her steadily. "Does it change anything for you?" She held his eyes. "No," she said. Something moved through his expression too fast to name. "Good," he said. "Bye, Dad." They left Greer at his camp and made their way back along the ridge in the last of the afternoon light. Emma walked beside Caleb instead of behind him because the trail was wide enough and she needed to think, and she thought better when she was moving. "Tell me the rest of it," she said. "The rest of what?" "Whatever else you know that you didn't tell me before we signed." He was quiet for a count of 5. "The line on the north slope, the longest one, runs through a section that Finch has been claiming is disputed territory. He filed paperwork in Helena 2 years ago. Nothing's come of it, but the filing exists." He kept his eyes on the trail. "If he pushes the legal angle, it could slow things down." "Slow things down or stop things?" "Slow," he said. "I've got the original survey. My claim predates his filing by 4 years. But legal takes time. And in the meantime, we work," he said. "We prove continuous occupation. We produce. We make the claim so established that any judge who looks at it sees exactly what it is." He glanced at her. "Which is mine?" Emma thought about this. "Finch was in the stable that morning," she said. "When you walked in. I noticed. He was there about the mule, he said, but he knew I was the one selling you the animals you needed." She worked through it out loud the way she would work through a problem with a horse, speak it into order. "If he knew you were coming for mules, he knew you were heading back up. He was there to see who he was dealing with." Caleb looked at her, and when you signed me on, she said, he understood that the operation got harder to pressure, because now it's not one man alone on a mountain. It's a documented legal partnership with a notarized contract and a witness in Judge Caldwell. "Yes," Caleb said. "That's why he came to the stable the next morning," she said. "Not to talk me out of it, to understand what he was up against." "Yes," Caleb said again. Emma stopped walking. He stopped too and looked back at her. "You thought of all that," she said, "before you made me the offer." He held her eyes. "I thought of some of it." "Did you offer me the job because you needed a partner, or because you needed a legal anchor?" The question was fair, and she meant it to be fair. She wasn't accusing him of anything. She was drawing the map. You couldn't navigate without a map. He didn't look away. "Both," he said, "but the order matters." He took one step back toward her. "I needed a partner first. The legal consideration came second. And I didn't approach you because I calculated the advantage. I approached you because you were the right person." He paused. "Those aren't the same thing." She looked at him for a long time. "No," she said slowly. "They're not." She started walking again. He fell into step beside her. After a while, she said, "If Finch sends men up here, then we deal with it when they come," he said. "And you're not worried." "I'm prepared," he said. "That's different from worried." He glanced at her. "Are you worried?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm paying attention," she said. He almost smiled again. She was learning to recognize the shape of it, a slight change in the lines around his eyes, a fraction of a second, where his guard went somewhere else. "That's all you ever need to do," he said. They reached the upper camp as the last light left the sky. The main camp was more than Emma had expected, a solid log structure low and tight against the hillside, built to resist wind and weight, rather than for any kind of comfort, but capable of providing both if you knew what you were looking at. A small corral in the back. A cash box elevated above ground on iron posts. A fire ring with a permanent stone surround. Someone had built this with years in mind. She stood in the door of the cabin and looked at the interior. Small. Functional. 2 built-in bunks along the far wall. A stove. A work table. Shelves with tools and supplies that were organized the way a man organized things when he knew exactly where everything needed to be because his life might depend on locating it fast. "It's a good camp," she said. "It does what it needs to," he said. She turned around. He was bringing the last of the mule loads in from the corral, moving easy despite the long day, because people who lived at altitude moved differently. They spent less energy performing capability and more actually having it. "I'll take the top bunk," she said. He glanced at the bunks. "You sure top's colder." "I sleep warm," she said. He nodded and set down the load. And that was the whole conversation about sleeping arrangements, which suited Emma exactly because the simplicity of it felt like respect. And she had not been respected in the ordinary practical ways for long enough that even the small version of it registered. She unpacked her things. He unpacked his. They cooked, they ate. The stove kept the small space warm enough. She was almost asleep when he spoke from the lower bunk. "Emma." She opened her eyes. The cabin was dark, the stove banked low. "Yeah," she said. "I should have been clearer about Finch before you signed," he said. "I'm telling you now, so you know I know that." She looked at the ceiling she couldn't quite see. "All right," she said. "It won't happen again," he said. "You sign anything going forward, you know everything I know." She was quiet for a moment. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah." "Go to sleep." A beat. Then quietly, what was definitely almost a laugh. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She closed her eyes. Outside the mountain held them in the particular way mountains held things without sentiment, without guarantee, but with a stability that human-made shelter rarely managed. It had been holding this cabin for years. It would hold it through whatever came next. Emma Carter lay in the top bunk of a log cabin above 8,000 feet, with a contract in her coat pocket, and a man she didn't yet know below her. And she thought about the morning she'd driven a nail through that horseshoe so hard the mule flinched. She'd done it on purpose. Not from anger, from grief. From the particular heaviness of another day, in a place that had decided she didn't count. She didn't feel that heaviness tonight. She wasn't sure what she felt instead, but it was lighter, considerably lighter. And somewhere down the mountain, she was almost certain Dale Finch was sitting in his office doing math that Emma had already done faster and better. She had a notarized contract. She had a man who kept his word. She had 3 good mules and a mountain that was already slowly beginning to feel less like someone else's territory. She had something she hadn't had in 6 years. A foothold. She intended to hold it. They had been on the mountain 11 days when the first man came. Emma heard him before she saw him. She was running the east line alone that morning. Caleb had taken the north drainage to check a trap that had been sprung wrong 2 days prior. And she was moving through the timber with the particular quiet she'd developed over the past week and a half. The kind of quiet that wasn't absence of sound but presence of attention. The horse coming up the trail was being ridden by someone who didn't know this mountain. She could tell by the rhythm of it too fast for the terrain, the animal uncertain under a rider who was pushing instead of listening. Amateur work. Dangerous work above 8,000 feet. She stepped off the trail and waited. The rider came through the pines and pulled up hard when he saw her standing there. Young mid-20s maybe. Ranch hand clothes, new boots that hadn't been broken in, right a rifle in the scabbard that he hadn't thought to reach for because he hadn't expected to need it. He'd expected to find a camp, not a woman standing in the middle of a mountain trail looking at him like he was the one who was lost. "Ma'am," he said, catching himself. "You're on private trap line," Emma said. "Morgan's claim. You got business here, state it." He blinked. Reset. "I'm looking for Mr. Morgan." "He's not here. I'm his partner. You can say it to me, or you can ride back down and say it to nobody." The young man shifted in the saddle. He had the look of someone delivering a message he hadn't written and wasn't sure he believed. "Mr. Finch sent me. He wants a meeting with Mr. Morgan in Red Bluff. Says he has a proposal." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Finch can write his proposal," she said. "Put it in a letter. Send it up with the next supply rider. Mr. Morgan will read it when he has time." Mr. Finch said it was time-sensitive. "Most things Dale Finch wants feel urgent to Dale Finch," Emma said. "That doesn't make them urgent to us." She took one step toward him. "You go back and tell him we received his message and we'll respond in our own time. And tell him to stay off this line. Next person I find up here without invitation is going to have a harder conversation than you're having." The young man looked at her. He was deciding something. Then he turned his horse and rode back down. Emma watched him go until the sound of the hooves faded. Then she stood very still in the quiet of the mountain and let the information settle into her. Finch hadn't waited a week. He hadn't even waited 2 weeks. The proposal, whatever it was a move, a preemptive one, which meant he was feeling the pressure of their presence up here in a way he hadn't anticipated. Good. She turned back to the trapline and kept working. She told Caleb that evening. He listened without interrupting, which she'd already learned was his way. He let information arrive completely before he responded to any part of it. She respected that. It was the opposite of how most men listened, which was to start forming the answer somewhere around the third sentence. "He's testing response time," Caleb said when she finished. "That's what I thought. He wants to know if we'll come down." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Coming down means we're nervous. It means we think his proposal matters more than the work. We're not going down." "No," he said. "We're not." He looked at her. "You handled it right." "I know," she said, that almost smile. "You always know." "I almost always know," she corrected. "There's a difference." He looked at her across the stove, and something in his expression shifted a fraction barely visible, but she'd been watching him for 11 days, and she'd gotten good at the fractions. It was the look he got when she said something that landed somewhere real inside him, somewhere he wasn't expecting. He looked away first. "I'll write Greer tomorrow," he said. "Tell him what happened. He needs to know Finch is sending riders." "Greer's already watching," Emma said. "He knows. Still worth telling him we saw it too." He stood moved to the stove. "How is the east line?" "2 mink, 1 beaver. The second set is still live. Something's been working around it without springing it. Clever animal." "Fox," he said. "There's a red fox that's been working that section for 2 years. I've never caught her." Emma looked at him. "You've been trying." "Not really." He refilled his cup. "I like that she's smarter than the trap." He sat back down. "Some things you respect more than you want." She looked at him for a moment. "That's an interesting thing for a trapper to say." "It's an honest thing," he said. She didn't push it, but she turned it over in her mind, the way she turned over things that seemed small and weren't. A man who ran a mountain trapline and respected the animal that refused to be caught. A man who built a camp meant to last and organized his shelves like someone who understood that efficiency was a form of care. A man who said things clearly and then went quiet and let them mean what they meant. She was building a picture of him. She tried not to. She built it anyway. The storm announced itself on the 14th day. Not the blizzard that came later and came hard, and nothing that came before. It was adequate preparation. But the first weather system rolled in on the 14th day, with enough force to matter a fast summer storm that came up from the south and hit the upper mountain in the early afternoon while they were both out on separate lines. Emma felt it in the animals first. The black mule, the stubborn one, the one she'd recommended because she planted, stopped dead on the trail, and raised her head and pointed her ears at nothing Emma could see. Emma stopped, listened. The wind changed direction. Just slightly. Just enough. She turned around and moved fast. Not running. Running on mountain terrain was how you fell. But moving with the kind of deliberate speed that didn't waste a single step. She got back to the camp with 20 minutes to spare. Caleb was already there. He'd felt it too, or seen it, or that particular instinct built by years at altitude had simply told him the way. The mountain told you things, not in words, in something older than words. They secured the mules without discussion, moving around each other in the small corral space with a coordination that surprised Emma even as she was doing it. She knew where he was going to be. He knew what she was going to need. They'd only been working together 2 weeks, and already the patterns had formed, not because they'd talked about them, but because two capable people in close quarters doing necessary work find each other's rhythms the way rivers find the lowest ground. Not by deciding, by moving. The storm hit 20 minutes after they got the last mule secured. It wasn't devastating as mountain storms went. It was loud and wet and fast, and it drove them both inside the cabin and kept them there for 4 hours, while it made its arguments outside. Emma sat at the work table and inventoried their supply situation. Caleb cleaned and oiled the traps he'd brought in for maintenance. They worked in the same room in companionable silence, broken only by the storm and the occasional necessary exchange. "We're low on salt," she said. "I know, supply rider comes in 5 days. We should send a list down with Greer if he comes through before then." "Already planning to." She looked up. "When did you think of that?" "Yesterday when I checked the cache." He didn't look up from the trap. "You were going to say it eventually. I figured I'd have the answer ready." She looked at him for a moment. "You do that a lot." "Do what?" "Have the answer ready before I get to the question." He looked up then. "Does that bother you?" She thought about it. "No," she said. "It would bother me if you were wrong." "Am I wrong?" "Not yet," she said, and went back to the inventory. The storm moved on before dark. They went out to check the mules. The black mule looked at Emma with what could only be described as reproach. "You knew that was coming, and you waited too long," the look said, and Emma pressed her forehead briefly against the animal's neck. "I know," she said quietly. "I know. We're fine." She felt Caleb watching her. She straightened. "She's going to be difficult tomorrow," she said matter of fact. "I know," he said. "So will the gray." "The gray will come around by mid-morning. The black holds grudges longer." "How do you know that?" "Same way I know anything about any of them," she said. "I paid attention." She moved past him toward the cabin. "There's a difference between an animal that's afraid and an animal that remembers. The black remembers. You have to respect what she's telling you even when it's inconvenient." He turned to follow her. "You talk about them like they're people." "They're not people," she said. "They're more honest than people. I talk about them like they deserve to be understood." She pushed open the cabin door. "Which they do." He stood in the doorway for a moment before he came in. She didn't look back, but she felt the pause, the weight of it. Something he was deciding not to say yet. She didn't push. She'd learned that about Caleb Morgan, too. You didn't push. You made space, and he came toward it in his own time, the way the chestnut horse had come to her on the hillside when Greer fell, not because she'd reached for it, but because she'd let it see that she wasn't going to. Now, Harlan Greer came through camp on the 16th day with information that changed the shape of everything. He arrived mid-morning on his old gray mule, moving carefully because his shoulder was still mending, and Emma made him sit and eat before he talked, because he'd ridden 4 miles through rough country to get there, and she could see from the set of his face that whatever he was carrying needed him settled before he could say it straight. He ate. He drank coffee. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, "Finch filed an injunction." Caleb went very still. Emma set her cup down. "In Helena," Greer continued. "Last week. He's claiming the North Slope line runs through his licensed territory. He's got a survey, don't know where he got it, don't know who signed it, but it exists, and it's been filed." Greer looked at Caleb steadily. "The territorial court has 45 days to respond. In the meantime, the filing creates a cloud on your claim." "A cloud," Caleb said, "means if a buyer comes for your furs, Finch's lawyers can argue the chain of ownership is disputed. Means you can't sell clean until it's resolved." Greer leaned forward. Caleb, if you can't sell the fall harvest, you can't pay for next year's supplies. You can't pay for next year's licenses. You lose the operation not because he won in court, but because you run out of money waiting for court. The cabin was very quiet. Emma's mind was moving fast. She was doing the math the way she always did, the way her father's uselessness had forced her to do it young, without help, understanding that when no one else was going to calculate survival, you did it yourself. Who filed the original claim? She said. Me, Caleb said. Where's the documentation? In the cabin, in the box under the east bunk. She was already moving. She pulled out the metal box, opened it, and went through the papers with fast, careful hands. Survey, license, date stamps. She found what she was looking for and held it up. Your claim is dated April 1879, she said. What date is on Finch's filing? Greer pulled a folded paper from his coat. A copy, someone in Helena had given it to him, or he'd paid for it, she didn't ask. She took it and read. March 1881, she said. 2 years after yours, Caleb said. 2 years after yours, she confirmed. His survey can't supersede your original claim unless he can prove your claim was fraudulent or abandoned. She looked at Caleb. Has anyone been working this line continuously for the past 7 years? Yes, he said. You have records. Sale receipts. 4 years of fur broker receipts from the Helena market. License renewals every 2 years. He was watching her. They're in the box. She went back to the box, found them, spread them on the table in chronological order, oldest to newest. Continuous occupation, she said. Documented commercial use. Original survey, predating his claim by 2 years. She looked up. Any lawyer worth hiring in Helena can walk into that territorial court and have the injunction dismissed in 30 days. Greer looked at the papers, then at Caleb. That's if you can get to Helena, and if you can afford the lawyer. What's the cost? Emma asked. Greer named a figure. Emma looked at the inventory of furs they'd already accumulated in 16 days. Then at Caleb. We sell what we have now, partial harvest, enough to cover the legal cost and travel. Selling now means lower prices, Caleb said. Summer furs aren't worth what fall furs are. Fall furs aren't worth anything if we can't prove ownership before the injunction clouds the title, Emma said. A smaller profit on a clean sale is better than a full harvest we can't move. She held his eyes. You know I'm right. He was quiet for a long moment. I know you're right, he said. Then we send Greer down with the early inventory. He finds a buyer in Red Bluff, not Finch's man, someone independent. We get cash. You ride to Helena, file a response, retain a lawyer. She looked at Greer. Can you move the furs? I know a buyer in Missoula who'll deal fair, Greer said. He's independent, no Finch connection. How fast can you get there? 3 days down and back if I push. Then we have 2 weeks before the injunction period matters, Emma said. That's enough time. Greer looked at Caleb with an expression Emma couldn't fully read, something between respect and surprise, like a man watching a card player turn over a hand he hadn't seen coming. She's good, Greer said. I know, Caleb said. He wasn't looking at Greer, he was looking at Emma. And the way he was looking at her, not like a partner reviewing a strategy, not like an employer evaluating an employee, but like a man looking at something he hadn't known he'd been missing until it was right in front of him, made her look away first. She gathered the papers, organized them, kept her hands busy. We need to make a copy of everything before Greer takes it, she said. Her voice was steady. In case anything is lost on the road. I have a ledger, Caleb said. He was still watching her. I'll start copying now. Greer left before noon. They spent the afternoon making copies, working at the same table close enough that their shoulders were occasionally within an inch of each other, and neither of them commented on it. Emma wrote. Caleb wrote. The stove burned low because neither of them stopped to add wood until Emma noticed the temperature dropping and stood up and added it herself, and when she sat back down, Caleb said without looking up from the page, Thank you. You would have noticed in 10 minutes, she said. Probably 8, he said. She looked at him sideways. Was that a joke? I'm capable of jokes, he said mildly. I wasn't sure, she said. I've been collecting evidence. That broke it. The almost smile became an actual one, brief and unguarded there, and gone in the span of a breath. But real. She'd seen it now, and it changed something, the way seeing a person laugh genuinely for the first time changes your understanding of everything they've shown you before. She looked back at her writing. Her hand was not entirely steady. She made it steady and kept going. The blizzard came on day 19. Not the summer storm from 3 days prior. This was something different. Wrong season, wrong speed, wrong everything. It came from the northwest in the black hours before dawn, and it came with the silence that preceded genuine danger, the particular hush that fell when the mountain decided to remind you what it was. Emma woke to that silence. She was down from this top bunk before she fully understood why, moving on instinct, her body making the decision her sleeping mind hadn't yet processed. She pushed open the cabin door. The cold hit her like a wall. Not summer cold, not altitude cold. This was the cold that belonged to February to January, to the deep months when this mountain shed everything unnecessary and became purely itself. It had no business being here in July. The mules. She was already moving. She crossed the distance to the corral in the dark, moving by feel and memory, and found them by sound, the particular distress sound that animals made when the temperature dropped wrong, and they knew it before the humans did. The gray was already pressing against the fence. The black was circling. The dun was standing with his head low, which was worst of all. A mule with his head down in bad cold was a mule conserving what heat he had left. I'm here, she said, and her voice was completely steady because she needed them to hear steady. I'm here. I've got you. She went for the dun first. Got him moving, not far, just enough to break the conserving posture, enough to make his body work and generate heat. Then the gray. Then the black, who tried to bite her, and she let the attempt pass without reacting. Because a mule that was angry was a mule that was warm enough to be angry, which was better than the alternative. She was moving the third animal when the cabin door opened. Caleb came out carrying 2 blankets from the bunks and a lantern. He took in the situation in one look and went to the dun without being told. They worked together in the lantern light, putting blankets on the 3 mules, getting them moving, talking to them. Caleb quietly, in the short sentences he used for everything. Emma in the particular tone she'd developed over years, the one that meant, I know, and you're fine, and I'm not leaving. 40 minutes in the worst cold Emma had felt in her life. Her hands stopped working right somewhere around the 30-minute mark, the cold getting into the joints, slowing the fingers. She kept working anyway. Slower, but working. Caleb noticed. He moved to her side, took the rope she was struggling to knot, and tied it with hands that were somehow still functional. And then he turned toward her, and without asking, he took both her hands in both of his and pressed them together between his palms. The heat was immediate. Not comfortable. The return of feeling to cold hands was never comfortable. It was pins and fire. But it was his heat, and it was deliberate, and he held on through her involuntary flinch, because he understood that the flinch was physics, not rejection. You should have woken me, he said. His voice was low and close because the wind was loud. I woke up and went, she said. You were right behind me. The dun would have gone down, he said. Not accusing, just fact. I know, she said. That's why I went. He was still holding her hands. She was aware of this with a specificity that had nothing to do with the cold. They're all right, she asked. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. They're all right. He looked at her. In the lantern light, his face was serious in the way it was when something mattered. Emma. I'm fine, she said. Your hands. They're warming up. She pulled them back gently. He let them go. She pressed them together the way he'd held them. I've been colder than this. When? The question surprised her. Not the content, the fact that he asked. The genuine wanting to know. Winter. I was 17, she said. The stable roof came down in a storm. I was inside, had to dig out by myself. She looked at her hands. 2 hours in the cold before I got free. I thought... She stopped. What did you think? He asked. She looked at him. I thought nobody was going to know, she said. If I didn't make it, nobody was going to come looking. She held his eyes. That bothered me more than the cold. Something moved through his face, something that went deep and stayed there. I would have come looking, he said, quiet, certain. She didn't know what to do with that. She turned back toward the mules. Let's get them inside the corral proper and add the windbreak, she said. Emma, I know, she said. She didn't look back. I know Caleb. She didn't know what she was saying she knew, but somehow he understood it because he moved to the other side of the dun and started working and didn't push it further, and that the restraint of it, the respect of it, landed harder than anything else he could have said. They got the mules stabilized and came inside just as the blizzard fully arrived. It hit the cabin with a weight that made the walls flex not break, because Caleb had built for this in ways Emma was only now fully understanding. But flex and groan, and the sound of it was the sound of the mountain making an argument about human smallness that Emma couldn't refute. She sat on the lower bunk. Her own bunk was too cold, the upper air too raw, and wrapped herself in the remaining blanket. Her hands ached. Her face ached. She realized, entirely exhausted. Caleb put more wood in the stove. Then he sat at the work table because there was nowhere else to sit except the other bunk, and the other bunk was where she was, and he wasn't going to presume. They listened to the storm for a while. You built this cabin for winter, she said. I built it to last, he said. There's a difference. No, he said, not on this mountain. She looked at the walls, at the way the corners fit, at the careful deliberateness of everything he'd made here. How long did it take you? 2 summers, he said. Ruth helped with the first one. We chinked the logs together. She was... He stopped. Emma waited. She was good at it, he said. Better than me, actually. More patient. I wanted it done. She wanted it right. A pause. She was right about that. She sounds like someone I would have liked, Emma said. Yeah, he said softly. I think she would have liked you too. He looked at the stove. She used to say she wanted a friend who didn't need anything from her, who was just capable, just present. He shook his head slightly. I didn't know what she meant at the time. Do you know now? Emma asked. He looked at her. Yes, he said. The storm hit the cabin in a fresh wave of sound and pressure. The lantern flickered, held. Emma looked at the man across the room from her, at the steady, weathered face, at the hands that had held hers in the dark, at the eyes that looked at her like she was a fact he was still processing, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not falling. Not yet. Something earlier than falling. The moment before the edge. She was terrified of it. She was also, she realized, not moving away from it. You should sleep, she said. We'll need to dig out in the morning. I know. He didn't move. Caleb? I'm not tired, he said. I know you're not. She pulled the blanket tighter. But one of us should sleep, and I'm not going to. She looked at him steadily. So you should. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved to the other bunk, lay down without taking off his boots, and put his arm over his eyes. He was asleep in 10 minutes. She could tell by his breathing. Emma sat in the dark with the storm pressing against the walls, and looked at the ceiling, and took stock of herself the way she'd always taken stock, honestly, without mercy, without sentiment. She had come up this mountain for money, for escape, for a foothold. She had not come up this mountain for this, for the particular weight of a man's hands around hers in the cold dark, for the way he said, I would have come looking. Like it was the simplest truth he'd ever told for the cabin he'd built to last. because that was the only way he knew how to build anything. She had not come for any of that. She understood with a clarity that frightened her, beginning to want to stay for it. Outside, the mountain made no comment. The storm kept pressing, and Emma Carter sat in the dark and breathed and understood that the avalanche she needed to be afraid of wasn't coming from outside the cabin walls. It was already moving inside her, quietly, steadily, the way the most permanent things always moved. The blizzard broke on the third morning. Emma knew before she opened her eyes. The sound changed. The pressure against the walls eased the particular freight train weight of the storm, lifting the way debt lifted when you finally paid the last of it. Gone all at once, and the silence after it more complete than any silence she'd heard in her life. She was still on the lower bunk. She had not slept. Caleb was already awake. She could tell by his breathing, had been able to tell for the last hour, that shift from the deep, slow rhythm of real sleep into the lighter, more alert quiet of a man lying still and thinking. Neither of them said anything for a while. The stove had burned low again. The cold in the cabin was the honest cold of a space that needed tending, not the killing cold of the night before. Emma got up first, added wood to the stove, put water on. She heard him sit up behind her. "How are your hands?" he said. "Fine," she said. She held them up briefly without turning. They were fine stiff at the first knuckle of the left hand where the cold had gotten deepest but functional. She'd had worse. "Emma, I said they're fine, Caleb." She turned then because she knew the particular tone he used when he was going to be persistent, and it was easier to meet it head on. "I need to check the mules. Then we need to dig the supply cache out and do an inventory on what the storm shifted. Then I want to look at the east line. The trap sets in the lower section may have been buried." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "All right." She went to check the mules. They were better than she'd feared. The blankets had held. The windbreak had done its job, and the black mule, who had been considering grievances the entire storm, expressed her feelings about the past 3 days by attempting to remove Emma's coat sleeve with her teeth. Emma held her ground, spoke to the animal in the flat, certain tone she used when she needed compliance without negotiation, and the mule subsided with the dignified expression of someone who had made their point. "All right," Emma said, pressing her forehead briefly against the animal's jaw. "I heard you." The mule exhaled, steam in the cold air, close enough to forgiveness. Caleb appeared at the corral fence. He'd brought feed, had seen what she was doing, and gone ahead with the next step, which was the thing about working with him that she kept noticing and kept trying not to notice. He didn't wait to be told what came next. He just knew. They worked through the morning in the particular harmony of two people who had stopped needing to coordinate verbally because the work itself had become the language. She moved left, he moved right. She started a task, he finished the adjacent one. It shouldn't have been as seamless as it was after 19 days, but it was. And she knew why, and she was still deciding what to do with knowing why. The first real trouble of the day arrived at mid-morning. She was working the east line alone. Caleb had gone north to assess storm damage on the upper sets, and she was moving through the deeper snow, carefully reading the signs, the way years of animal work had taught her to read signs. What had moved through here? What had avoided it? What the pattern of disturbance in the snow said about what the past 3 days had done to this section of the line. She found the first 2 traps buried and unsprung. Good. She marked them cleared and moved on. The third set was wrong, not buried, sprung, but not by an animal. She crouched over it and looked at the mechanism and the ground around it with the careful attention she gave to problems she needed to understand before she acted on them. The trap had been sprung by hand. She could read the pressure pattern in the snow around the trigger. The wrong angle for any animal that would naturally trip this set, the boot print partially filled by drifted snow but still visible to someone who knew what to look for. Someone had been on this line. During the storm, not before. The print was under 6 inches of drift, but above the older snow it had been made after the storm started while visibility was low and any sensible person was indoors. which meant whoever had made it had come up here in the blizzard deliberately. Not scouting, not lost, working. Someone who knew what they were doing and didn't want to be seen doing it. She stood up, looked around at the tree line with the calm, direct attention of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life and had learned to use that underestimation as information. Nobody there now. She marked the location in her memory, not just the trap set, but the angle of approach, the likely path of entry, the direction the boot print faced, and kept moving down the line. She found 2 more sprung sets before she turned back. Caleb was already at the cabin when she returned. He'd made better time on the north line than expected, which meant less storm damage than they'd feared, which was one good piece of news in a morning that needed it. She told him what she'd found. He listened without moving. That particular stillness of his, the one she'd learned, was not absence, but concentration, every part of him attending. 3 sets, he said. 3 that I found, she said. There may be more on the section I didn't reach. Direction of approach. From the east ridge, not the main trail, someone who knew there was a secondary access. She looked at him steadily. Someone who's been up here before. Or someone who was told, he said. Finch's man, she said. Or one of them. He stood up. The rider who came 3 days ago. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. He would have looked at the terrain while he was up here. Noted the access points. He was only here for 20 minutes. 20 minutes is enough if you're paying attention. Caleb moved to the door. I need to check the north cache. If they came in from the east ridge, they might have scouted the whole perimeter. Wait, she said. He stopped. If they interfered with the cache, that's not scouting anymore, she said. That's sabotage. And if it's sabotage, we need documentation before we touch anything. She pulled her coat back on. I'm coming with you. He looked at her for a count of 3. All right, he said. The north cache was intact. She let out a breath she hadn't fully acknowledged holding. Caleb checked the lock. Checked the foundation posts. Checked the ground around it for the same signs she'd read on the east line. Nothing. Whoever had been up here had focused on the trap line rather than the supply stores, which told her something. They're not trying to starve us out, she said. No, he said. They're trying to reduce the harvest. Make the season unprofitable. If we can't show commercial production, the continuous occupation argument weakens. They're fighting the legal case through the trap line, she said. Smart, he said with a flatness that made clear he was not complimenting Finch. Emma turned it over in her mind. We need to document every sprung set. Date, location, evidence of interference. Written record. She looked at him. If this goes to the territorial court, we want to walk in with a sabotage claim alongside the ownership claim. That makes Finch a criminal, not just a litigant, Caleb said. It makes whoever he sent up here a criminal, she said, and whoever sent them responsible. She held his eyes. He pushed this from a legal inconvenience to something else. We should make sure the court knows that. Caleb was very still. You think like a lawyer, he said. I think like someone who's been on the wrong side of unfair for a long time, she said. I know what the weapons are. I just never had the standing to use them before. Something moved through his face, the same depth she'd seen last night in the lantern light when she'd told him about being 17 and alone in the cold and afraid that nobody would know. You have standing now, he said quietly. She held his eyes. I know, she said. They spent that afternoon building a written record. Emma wrote, and Caleb dictated the details of every anomaly they'd observed since arriving on the mountain. The rider, the sprung traps, the boot prints, the timing relative to the storm. She wrote in the same deliberate hand she'd used on their original contract, each fact stated plainly without embellishment, because plain facts were harder to argue with than decorated ones. Caleb watched her write. She was aware of him watching. She didn't comment on it. You write better than most men I've dealt with in business, he said. I taught myself, she said without looking up. When I was 12. My father couldn't read. She turned the page. I understood early that if I couldn't put something in writing, nobody was going to do it for me. What did you write first? She paused. A letter, she said. To the county land office. About the stable my father had a verbal agreement on. When he died, the owner tried to deny the agreement. She kept writing. I was 16. I wrote the letter myself. Referenced the county statutes I'd found in the courthouse library. She turned to the next item. The owner honored the agreement. The cabin was quiet except for the scratch of the pencil. You won that by yourself, Caleb said. I had no one else, she said. And that's the only time you've had to fight like that. She looked up, met his eyes. No, she said simply. He held her gaze. Something in his expression was she didn't have a precise word for it. Not pity, not admiration exactly. Something between those two things that had a different name she wasn't ready to find yet. He looked back at the table. What do you need from me to finish the record? The dates of your license renewals, she said. And the names of anyone who witnessed your continuous occupation of this claim. Anyone who can corroborate. Greer, he said immediately. He's been on this range for 5 years. He's seen me working these lines every season. Anyone else? The supply writer. His name is Tom Packard. He's been making this run for 3 years. He can testify to delivery dates and quantities. He paused. And the fur broker in Helena. 4 years of receipts with dates. That's strong, she said. She wrote the names. That's very strong. Will it be enough? She looked at what they'd assembled. The original claim, the license renewals, the fur sale receipts, the sabotage record, the witness list. She looked at it the way she looked at a horse before she declared it sound, not hoping it was enough knowing it was. Yes, she said. He exhaled. Just slightly. She noticed because she'd learned to read his small signals the way she read animals. Not the large declared things, but the tiny involuntary ones that said what was actually true. He had been more worried about this than he'd shown. She had known that. She hadn't commented on it because he was working through it the way he worked through everything internally steadily without asking anyone to carry it for him. She respected that. She also understood with the particular clarity of someone who had spent her whole life carrying things alone that carrying everything alone was not strength. It was just loneliness with a more dignified name. She put her pencil down. Caleb, she said. He looked at her. When you decided to come down from this mountain this summer, she said carefully. The mules, the supplies, all of it. Were you planning to fight Finch alone? A pause. Yes, he said. And you thought you could? I thought I'd manage, he said. The distinction he'd made before she remembered. Managing wasn't prospering. You were going to lose, she said. Not cruelly, just clearly. He didn't deny it. Probably, he said. The legal costs alone would have... He stopped. Would have finished you, she said. Yes. She looked at the table, at the documents between them. And now, he looked at the same documents, at what they'd built together in 3 weeks from contract paper and pencil and the accumulated evidence of a life honestly lived on this mountain. Now, he said slowly, I think we're going to be all right. She looked up. He was already looking at her. We, she said quietly. We, he said. No hesitation. She looked back at the paper. Her hand was doing the thing again, the not quite steadiness that she made steady by deciding to. She picked up the pencil. Then let's finish this, she said. The twist came on day 23. Greer arrived at midday with his saddlebag and his careful face, and the look of a man who was carrying something he wished he wasn't. He had made it to Missoula. He had found the buyer. He had sold the early harvest at the reduced summer price, which was exactly what they'd planned, and the cash was in the saddlebag, which was good. And then he said, There's something else. Emma and Caleb both went still. The buyer in Missoula, Greer said. He knows the fur market, knows who's moving what and from where. He set his cup down. He told me that Finch has already pre-sold Morgan's fall harvest. Forward contract, signed 3 weeks ago. The room went completely silent. He can't pre-sell what he doesn't own, Emma said. He pre-sold what he intends to own, Greer said. There's a buyer in St. Louis. Large operation. They've put money down on the expectation that Finch will control these lines by October. His voice was careful and flat. If Finch wins the injunction, or if the case drags long enough that Morgan can't operate, the St. Louis buyer takes delivery of whatever Finch produces from these lines under his claimed title. Caleb stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room. Emma looked at Greer. He wasn't trying to buy Caleb out, she said. He was never going to offer enough to buy him out. He's been planning to force him out. The injunction was always phase 2. What was phase 1? Greer asked. Emma thought about it. Felt the shape of it click into place the way the pieces always clicked when you stopped reacting and started thinking. The writer who came up with the meeting request, she said. It wasn't a proposal. It was a timeline check. He wanted to know how much Caleb knew and how worried he was. She looked at Greer. If Caleb had come down for the meeting, Finch would have known he was nervous. He would have accelerated. But Caleb didn't come down, Greer said. Because Emma sent the writer back, Caleb said from the window. He turned. His face was the particular controlled stillness of a man who was furious and not performing it. If you'd let me go down, you would have walked into a room where he had all the information and you had none, Emma said. And you would have reacted honestly, because that's who you are, and he would have used that. She held his eyes. I didn't know all of this 3 weeks ago, but I knew that meeting was a trap. He looked at her for a long moment. You knew, he said. I suspected, she corrected. There's a difference. Greer looked between them. So what do we do now? Emma picked up the written record they'd completed 2 days ago. Set it in front of Greer. You're going to Helena, she said. Not just to respond to the injunction. You're going to file a counterclaim. Interference with lawful commercial operation. Documented sabotage of trap sets. And, she looked at Caleb. We need to know if pre-selling an asset you don't legally own constitutes fraud under territorial law. It does, Caleb said. Quiet. Certain. Emma looked at him. You know that. I know a man in Helena who does, he said. A lawyer. He handled Ruth's. He stopped, restarted. He handled some business for us before. He's good. He's honest. He looked at Greer. His name is William Cord. He's on Main Street in Helena. Tell him it's Morgan. He'll see you. Greer picked up the documents. This is going to cost. The money from the early harvest, Emma said. It covers legal costs and Cord's retainer. We calculated it. She looked at Caleb. He nodded. Greer stood, put on his coat. Looked at them both with the expression of a man who was glad he'd come up this mountain hurt and angry on a spooked horse 3 weeks ago. I'll ride tonight, he said. I'll be in Helena in 4 days. Be careful on the East Ridge, Emma said. Come down the main trail. He looked at her. Someone watching. Someone was, she said. Act like they still are. He nodded. Left. The cabin went quiet. Emma stood at the table with the remaining copies of their documents and listened to Greer's mule moving away from camp, the hoofbeats fading toward the trail, and then the mountain going back to its own business. She felt Caleb before she heard him move. The slight change in the air that meant he was close. Emma, he said. She turned. He was standing 3 feet from her. His expression was open, unguarded in a way she'd seen only twice before, once in the dark during the blizzard, and once in the moment on the slope when he'd held her hands. He had the look of a man who had decided to say something and wasn't going to take it back. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. When I walked into the livery that morning, he said, I was down from the mountain because I needed supplies. That's true. But I'd been telling myself I needed to come down for 6 weeks and finding reasons not to. He held her eyes. I didn't know why I finally did. Until I saw you put that horseshoe nail through that hoof and not apologize for it. He paused. I think I came down because I was ready to stop managing. She was very still. And I hired you because you were right for the work, he continued. That's true. Every reason I gave you that morning was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. He looked at her with the directness that was she'd understood for a long time now, not distance, but its opposite, a man so unwilling to be dishonest that he'd rather give you silence than pretend. The whole truth is that I looked at you, and I thought that's someone I don't have to be afraid for. Her throat tightened. Why would you be afraid for someone you just met? She said. Her voice was steady. She was making it steady. I was afraid for Ruth every day, he said. From the first day I loved her to the last day I had her. I was always calculating what I'd lose. His jaw tightened briefly. And I still lost her. And all that calculating was just fear I dressed up as love. He looked at her. When I saw you, I didn't feel that. I felt something else. What? She asked. Safe, he said simply. She felt the word land in her chest, like something physical. Caleb, she said. I'm not asking you for anything, he said quickly, cleanly. I know what the contract says. I know what the season is. This isn't a renegotiation. His voice was low. I just needed you to know that what's happened up here, what you've built with me, it's not nothing. It's not a transaction that's going to end in October and leave us both exactly where we started. Emma looked at him. She thought about 16 years old and a letter to the county land office. About 6 years in a town that had decided her worth before she could argue it. About the morning she'd driven that nail through the horseshoe so hard the mule flinched not from anger but from grief, from the accumulated weight of being unseen. She thought about his hands around hers in the dark, about the way he'd said, I would have come looking, about the cabin he'd built for 2 people, even after the one person he'd built it for was gone. I know it's not nothing, she said. Her voice was not steady this time. She let it be unsteady. I've known for a while. He looked at her. Then why? He started. Because I don't know what I'm worth yet, she said. Not here, not really. I know what I can do. I know how I work. But worth is different from usefulness. And I've been useful my whole life, and I've never once been... She stopped, restarted. I need to know that what I feel up here is real, and not just relief. Not just someone finally seeing me and me mistaking that for something more. He was quiet for a long moment. That's a fair thing to need to know, he said. I'm not saying no, she said quickly, and she felt her face do something she couldn't entirely control. I'm saying give me the rest of the season. He looked at her steadily. Emma Carter, he said. I have been waiting for you my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for. He said it the same way he said everything plainly without performance. I can wait until October. She felt the tears come, and she didn't hide them, because she had stopped hiding things up here, had left that habit somewhere below the tree line. She blinked them back, but she didn't pretend they hadn't been there. All right, she said. All right, he said. He stepped back to his side of the room, which she understood was a gift, the space to feel what she was feeling, without it being witnessed at close range by the person who'd caused it. She appreciated that more than she could have said. She turned back to the table, picked up the papers. We need to prepare for the possibility that Finch sends someone up here again before Greer gets back from Helena, she said. I know, he said. His voice was steady. Back to the work, but warm now. Something in it that hadn't been there before, or that had been there and was now permitted to be. If someone comes up that east ridge, we see them first, he said. We know the terrain and they don't. And if they're not just scouting, he looked at her. Then we deal with what they are. He moved to the shelf and checked the rifle, but together. She looked at the rifle, then at him. Together, she agreed. Outside, the mountain settled back into its summer self after the wrong season storm, the snow already beginning to retreat under the July sun that had returned hard and clear and unambiguous. The trap lines needed checking. The supply situation needed managing. The legal battle they'd built together on pencil and paper and sheer refusal to be moved was now in Greer's saddlebag headed toward Helena. They had done everything they could with what they had. That was all you ever could do. Emma understood that better than most. She picked up her coat. "I'll do the east line," she said. "See how many sets are actually compromised." "I'll take north," he said. "Check in at midday." "Midday," she said. She was almost at the door when he said it. "Emma." She stopped. "I meant what I said," he said. "All of it." She stood in the doorway with the mountain laid out in front of her, and the morning light coming in around her, and the life she'd always deserved finally feeling like something with an address. "I know you did," she said. "That's why I need until October." She walked out. Behind her, she heard him move not toward her. Just the ordinary sounds of a man resuming his work. The sounds of someone who had said what he needed to say, and was content to let it sit. It was, she thought, as she walked toward the east line with her hands in her pockets and her face in the sun, the most romantic thing she'd ever experienced. Not the words. The restraint. The patient, undemanding certainty of a man who had finally stopped being afraid and started simply waiting. For her. Greer came back on the 9th day. Emma heard his mule on the trail before Caleb did. She always heard the animals first, that particular attunement that years of work had built into her, the way weather built itself into mountain rock. And she was already at the corral fence when he came through the tree line. She read his face before he dismounted. He was not carrying bad news, but he was carrying complicated news, which was its own category, and she'd learned the difference between the two a long time ago. Bad news made a person's face go flat. Complicated news made it go careful. Greer's face was careful. "Get inside," she said. "Tell us together." Caleb was at the work table when they came in. He looked at Greer the same way Emma had, reading the face, reading the body, reaching the same conclusion she had. He put down what he was working on and waited. Greer sat. He pulled the saddlebag onto the table and opened it. "Cord took the case," he said. "He read everything the same night I arrived. He said, and I'm giving you his exact words, he said. It was the cleanest continuous occupation claim he'd seen in 15 years of territorial law." He looked at Caleb. "He filed the counterclaim the next morning. Interference with lawful commercial operation. Documented sabotage. And," he paused, "fraud. Forward sale of an asset under disputed and ultimately invalid title." "That last one lands on Finch personally," Emma said. Cord said the same thing. Greer nodded. "The fraud claim isn't against a business. It's against Dale Finch as an individual, which means his personal assets are exposed, not just his operation." Caleb leaned back slowly. The kind of movement a person made when weight was being redistributed, not removed, but shifted into a more manageable position. "What's the timeline?" he asked. "Cord expects the territorial judge to dismiss Finch's injunction within 30 days. The counterclaim will take longer, 60 to 90 days for a full hearing." Greer reached into the saddlebag again. "But here's what I didn't expect." He pulled out a folded letter and set it on the table. "This arrived at Cord's office the day after he filed," Greer said, "from the St. Louis buyer." Emma and Caleb both looked at the letter. "He's withdrawing from Finch's contract," Greer said. "The moment the fraud claim was filed, the St. Louis buyer's lawyers contacted Cord directly. They want nothing to do with a disputed title. They put money down on a sure thing, and Finch didn't give them a sure thing." Greer's voice was level, but there was something underneath it. "The St. Louis buyer is angry. He's out a significant deposit, and he's making that Finch's problem, not ours." The cabin was quiet for a moment. "Finch lost his buyer," Emma said. "Finch lost his buyer," Greer confirmed. Emma looked at Caleb. Something moved through his face, not triumph. Too tired for triumph, too real for it. Something closer to relief, which was what came after you'd been carrying something heavy long enough that when someone finally helped you set it down, you didn't feel joy. You felt your own arms again. Is it over? Caleb asked. The injunction is effectively dead, Greer said. The fraud claim is alive. Cord says Finch may try to settle out of court rather than face a hearing. He paused. And there's one more thing. Emma looked at him. Cord spoke to Judge Alderman in Helena, the one who handles territorial claim disputes. Greer folded his hands on the table. Alderman wants the record you built, the full written record. He's already heard of the sabotage Cord told him, and he wants to see the documentation. He looked at Emma specifically. Cord said whoever wrote that record did it like someone who'd studied law. I studied survival, Emma said. It's the same discipline. Greer almost smiled. Cord said to tell you, and again his exact words, that if you ever want to read law formally, he'd sponsor your application himself. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from any they'd had in the cabin before. Not the silence of tension or exhaustion or the mountain pressing in. The silence of something opening. Emma looked at the table. She felt Caleb looking at her. She didn't look back at him yet. She wasn't ready for what she'd see in his face because she knew what it would be, and she wasn't sure she could hold herself together through it cleanly. Tell Cord we're grateful, she said, and we'll be in touch about the fraud hearing. Greer stayed the night. They fed him well. Emma had brought down 2 grouse that morning, the first time she'd hunted on the mountain, an impulse she hadn't examined too carefully. And the 3 of them sat around the stove after supper and talked about nothing particularly important, which was its own kind of recovery after weeks of everything being important. Greer left at first light. Emma stood at the corral fence and watched him go. Caleb came and stood beside her, not close enough to touch, just beside her. Present. Cord's offer, he said. Don't, she said. I'm not pushing, he said. I just want to say it's real, if that's something you want. She looked at the trail where Greer had gone. I've wanted to read law since I was 16, and I wrote that letter to the county land office, she said. I've wanted it the same way I've wanted things I understood I couldn't have. And now, he said. She was quiet. Now I don't know what I can't have anymore, she said. And that's... She stopped. That's a harder thing to manage than certainty was. He was quiet for a moment beside her. Good hard or bad hard? He asked. She looked at him sideways. Good, she said. He nodded, looked at the mountain. We've got the north line to run today. I know, she said. And the black mule needs her rear hooves looked at. I know that too. All right then, he said. He pushed off from the fence. Ready when you are. She watched him walk toward the cabin and felt the particular ache of someone standing at the edge of something they'd always believed was for other people. She pushed off the fence and followed him. The second twist came on the 31st day, and it came from the direction Emma least expected. It came from Red Bluff. The supply rider Tom Packard, the man Caleb had named as a witness, 3 years of consistent delivery runs, arrived 4 days ahead of schedule, with a look on his face that Emma had learned to read on working men, the look of someone who had information they'd been thinking about the entire ride up. He carried the regular supplies. He also carried a letter, not from Cord, not from Greer, from Judge Caldwell. Caleb opened it at the table, while Emma stood beside him close enough to read over his shoulder, which she did without asking, because they'd long since passed the threshold where permission was needed for ordinary proximity. She read it twice. Then she looked up. Finch tried to have the contract voided, she said. He filed a challenge, Caleb said. His voice was very controlled. He's claiming the contract was signed under duress, that I pressured you. The cabin went very quiet. Tom Packard, who had the good sense to understand he was standing in a room where something serious was happening, set down the supply crate and stepped back toward the door without being asked. Emma read the letter again. Caldwell's handwriting was precise and legal and entirely clear. Finch had filed a challenge to the notarized partnership contract in the county court. His claim that Emma Carter, a woman of limited means and social standing, had been coerced by Caleb Morgan into signing an agreement that benefited Morgan disproportionately. That the contract was therefore invalid. That Emma had no legal standing as a partner in the operation. It was Emma understood with a cold clarity that settled into her the way real anger settled, not hot, not loud, but deep and permanent, the most sophisticated thing Finch had done. Because it was designed to look like protection. Like a man standing up for a woman who'd been taken advantage of. When what it actually was a man trying to erase her. "He's using me to get to you," she said. Her voice was even. She was very, very calm. "Yes," Caleb said. The same controlled evenness. "If the contract is voided, I have no standing. The notarized record becomes irrelevant. The counterclaim loses its second signature." She set the letter down. "And I go back to being nobody he has to account for." "Yes," Caleb said again. She looked at him. "He watched you walk through that crowd in the livery. He knows you'll fight for the claim. He's not sure you'll fight the same way if it looks like fighting means using me." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He miscalculated. Badly," Emma said. She turned to Tom Packard. "Tom, I need you to answer something honestly." He straightened. "Yes, ma'am." "In 3 years of supply runs to this camp before I came up here, have you ever known Caleb Morgan to pressure, mislead, or misrepresent anything to anyone in his dealings?" Packard didn't hesitate. "No, ma'am. Mr. Morgan's word is it's the standard I measure other men against if I'm honest. And since I've been here, have you seen any indication that I'm here against my will, that I've been coerced, that I'm anything other than exactly what the contract says?" Packard looked at her steadily. "I see a woman who runs this operation like she built it herself," he said. "And I see a man who, begging your pardon, Mr. Morgan, follows her lead on the animal work more than she follows his." Emma looked at Caleb. He looked at Packard. "You'll say that in writing." "I'll say it to a judge," Packard said, standing up. Emma turned back to the table, picked up the letter. "We need to get this to Cord today," she said, "before Finch's challenge gets a hearing date." "Packard can carry it back down," Caleb said. "I know." She was already writing. "I'm drafting our response." She looked up briefly. "You're going to dictate. I need your voice in this, not just your signature. Cord needs to hear how you speak about this situation." "All right," Caleb said. He sat down across from her. She put the pencil to the paper. "Tell me," she said, "in your own words exactly how this partnership began and exactly what it has been." He looked at her, and he told it. All of it. The mules, the contract, the crowd in the livery, the judge's office, the mountain. What Emma had built, and what she had fought, and what she had figured out before he'd gotten there himself. He told it plainly and without embellishment, because that was who he was, and plain truth was harder to dismiss than decorated claims. Emma wrote every word. When he finished, she looked at what she'd written. Then she added one line at the bottom in her own voice, as herself as a woman who was done allowing other people to define the terms of her own story. She wrote, "I signed this contract freely, with full knowledge of its terms, because I had earned the right to make that choice. No one who has ever questioned my capability has also offered me a fair wage for it. Caleb Morgan did both. I will not allow my own agency to be erased in the name of protecting me from it." She signed it, slid it to Caleb. He read her added line. He read it twice. Then he looked up, and the thing in his face was not the almost smile. It was something beyond that. Something full and clear and unguarded. "That's the truest thing anyone's written in this case," he said. "Sign it," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. He signed it. Packard rode down with the letter that afternoon. They watched him go from the corral fence the same way they'd watched Greer go, and the mountain received the silence of his departure, the way it received everything without ceremony. Emma's hands were in her pockets. The summer that had started in Red Bluff with heat that felt like punishment had shifted into something else up here. Thinner, cleaner, the particular quality of high-altitude August that was warm in the direct sun and honest about its temperature everywhere else. "He's going to lose," she said, not a question. Finch, Caleb said. Yes. Yes, he said. He is. She looked at the trail where Packard had gone. When this is finished, she said carefully, what happens to the operation? What do you mean? The legal battle. When it resolves. When the injunction is dead and the fraud claim settles and the contract challenge fails. She kept her eyes on the trail. What does the operation look like then? He was quiet for a moment. That depends, he said. On what? On what you decide in October, he said. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at her with the same directness he'd used when he told her he'd been waiting his whole life without knowing what for. The same absence of performance, just a man standing in the plain truth of what he felt offering it without condition. I haven't decided yet, she said. I know, he said. I'm not going to decide yet. I know that too, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. You're not afraid, she said. That I won't. I'm not afraid of much anymore, he said. The same words he'd said by the fire in the first week, but different now, not admission of damage, declaration of something else. And I've never been afraid of you. Why not? She said quietly. Because you're not something that happens to a person, he said. You're someone who decides. He looked at her steadily. And whatever you decide, it'll be right, because it'll be yours. She felt the tears again. Let them come to the edge and held them there. That might be, she said, the best thing anyone has ever said to me. I mean it, he said. I know you do, she said. That's what makes it the best thing. The hearing came to them rather than requiring them to go to it. That was Cord's doing a procedural maneuver Emma hadn't anticipated but recognized immediately as elegant. Cord had argued to Judge Alderman that requiring the operating partners to abandon their documented continuous occupation in order to attend a hearing was itself prejudicial to their claim. Alderman had agreed. He sent a circuit representative up to Red Bluff with authority to take depositions and review evidence in person. The representative, a lean, precise man named Foster, who rode a good horse and said exactly as much as necessary, and no more, which Emma respected, arrived in Red Bluff on a Wednesday. Caleb and Emma came down from the mountain for the first time in 38 days. Red Bluff received them. That was the only way Emma could describe it. The town that had spent 6 years deciding her value looked at her when she rode in beside Caleb Morgan, not behind him, beside him, because that was what they were, and something shifted in the collective expression of the place. She could feel it the way you felt a current change in a river. Not dramatic, not an apology, just a recalibration, an adjustment of a calculation that had been made with wrong numbers for a long time. Aldous Pratt was standing outside his bank when they rode past. He looked at Emma. She looked back at him. She did not nod. She did not acknowledge him in any way that could be read as supplication or forgiveness. She simply looked the way you looked at something you had moved past. He was the one who looked away. The deposition happened in Judge Caldwell's office, which was appropriate since he'd witnessed the contract that Finch was trying to void. Foster sat at the table with his papers. Caleb and Emma sat across from him. Their lawyer Cord had come from Helena himself, which told Emma something about how seriously he took this case, sat beside them. Finch was there. He'd brought a lawyer from Missoula, a heavy man who kept his coat on despite the heat, and who looked at Emma when she entered the room with the particular expression of a man recalculating a problem he'd thought was simpler. Foster asked his questions methodically. Caleb answered them the same way he answered everything, directly without embellishment. Emma answered hers with the precision of someone who had spent 38 days on a mountain building the record that was now being read back to her in a wood-paneled office. Then Finch's lawyer made his argument. He was good. Emma would give him that. He built the coercion case carefully constructing an image of a vulnerable woman with limited options who had been offered a contract she wasn't equipped to evaluate. He used words like dependent and isolated and unsophisticated, and each one landed in the room like a stone into water, the ripple spreading outward. Emma waited. When he finished, Foster looked at her. "Miss Carter," he said, "would you like to respond?" Yes, she said. She didn't look at notes. She didn't look at Cord. She looked at Foster directly, because he was the one whose understanding mattered in this room. I wrote the original contract, she said. Mr. Morgan signed the version I drafted. I set the terms, I named the witnesses, and I selected the venue for notarization. I have been managing the animal operation on this claim at altitude in adverse weather for 38 days. I identified the legal vulnerability in Mr. Finch's injunction before our lawyer did. I built the evidentiary record that Mr. Cord is currently holding in that folder. She paused. I am many things. Unsophisticated is not among them. And any claim that I required protection from a contract I wrote myself is not concern for my welfare. It is an attempt to remove me from a situation where my presence is inconvenient to someone else's plans. The room was very quiet. Finch's lawyer wrote something on his paper. Foster looked at him. Counselor, your response. The response was thin. Emma heard it and knew it was thin, and could see from the way Cord's posture changed a slight relaxation barely visible that he knew it too. Foster closed his file. He looked at both parties. He looked at the documents. He looked at the room with the expression of a man who had seen enough of these situations to know what he was looking at, and was not going to pretend otherwise. I'll have my recommendation to Judge Alderman within the week, he said. I anticipate he'll rule within 30 days after that. They rode back up the mountain that afternoon. They didn't talk much on the way up. There was a particular kind of exhaustion that came after you'd held yourself completely together in a room full of people who wanted you to fall apart, and Emma was feeling it in every part of her body. Not collapse. Just the natural release of sustained tension. Caleb rode beside her. He matched her pace the same way he always did, not leading, not following. Beside. About an hour from camp, Emma said, "Thank you." He looked at her. For what? For not speaking for me in that room. He was quiet for a moment. It wasn't my place. A lot of men would have thought it was, she said. A lot of men are wrong about a lot of things, he said. She looked at him. The mountain light at this hour was the particular gold that came in the last hours of the day, and it did something to the angles of his face that she'd stopped pretending she didn't notice. Caleb, she said. Yeah. I've made my decision, she said. He went still. Not pulling up his horse, they kept moving, but still inside his body, in the way he went still, when something mattered. October's not here yet, he said carefully. I know, she said. I'm not waiting for October. He looked at her. I came up this mountain for money, she said. For escape. For a foothold in a life that kept sliding out from under me. She kept her eyes on the trail ahead. I'm staying because none of those things are the reason anymore. Silence. The horses moving. The mountain in the gold light holding everything in its impersonal, faithful way. Why are you staying? He said. Quiet. Not pushing. Just wanting to hear it. She looked at him. Because you built something up here that's meant to last, she said. And I'm tired of things that don't. He held her eyes. The almost smile came. And then for the first time in the 38 days she'd known him, it didn't stop at almost. It became the real thing, full and warm and slightly unguarded in the way that faces were unguarded when they forgot to manage themselves. It changed him. Not into someone different. Into someone she'd been seeing the shape of for weeks, finally fully lit. Emma Carter, he said. Don't make a speech, she said. You'll ruin it. He laughed. She hadn't heard him laugh before. It was a low sound. Genuine, surprised out of him, the way real laughter always was, not performed, not social, just a man caught off guard by joy. She felt it in her chest, like a bell struck once clean and resonant, the sound filling the space and then settling. All right, he said. No speech. They rode. The ruling came 26 days later. Cord sent it up with Packard, and Emma read it at the table, while Caleb stood at the stove, and the black mule could be heard expressing her opinions about something in the corral outside. Judge Alderman had dismissed Finch's injunction. He had upheld the Morgan-Carter partnership contract as fully valid, freely entered, and legally binding. He had found sufficient evidence to advance the fraud claim to a full hearing, and had issued a preliminary finding that Finch's forward sale of assets under disputed title constituted bad faith dealing under territorial commercial law, and at the bottom of the ruling in language that Foster had clearly written carefully. The court notes that the evidentiary record in this matter was compiled with exceptional thoroughness, and reflects credit on the parties who assembled it. The court further notes that the partnership model demonstrated in this operation, documented, witnessed, legally sound, represents the standard by which territorial claims management should properly be conducted. Emma set the paper down. She was quiet for a moment. "Well," she said. Caleb looked at her. "It's over," she said. "The injunction's over," he said. "The fraud hearing's still coming." "Finch will settle," she said. "Before the hearing. His lawyer knows what Cord has. He'll settle." "You're sure? He forward sold assets he didn't own to a buyer who's already turned against him. His business reputation is gone regardless of the hearing outcome. Settling limits his personal financial exposure." She looked at the ruling. "He'll settle. Cord should push for a public admission." "You think Cord will get that?" "I think Cord is very good," she said. "And I think I'm going to write him a letter this week, outlining the argument for it." Caleb looked at her. "Cord's going to want to hire you," he said. "He already offered," she said. "Greer told me. Sponsored application to read law." And she looked at the ruling. At her name beside Caleb's in the court's language. The Morgan-Carter partnership. Not Miss Carter. Not the woman Morgan brought up from Red Bluff. The partnership. Two names, equal weight, equal standing. "And I'm thinking," she said. He came and sat across from her, put his hands on the table, not reaching for her, just present, grounded, the way he was always grounded. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had walked through a crowd without performing it, who had held her hands in the dark without asking for anything in return, who had built a cabin for two people, and waited and said, "Whatever you decide will be right, because it will be yours." "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that a woman who reads law and runs a mountain operation with a documented legal partnership is a harder target than either one alone." He was very still. "I'm thinking," she continued, "that Cord is in Helena and the mountain is here, and I'm not willing to choose between them." "You don't have to," he said. His voice was low. "I know," she said. "Helena's 4 days' ride," he said. "Court season is winter months mostly. The mountain's quiet in winter." "I know that too," she said. "Emma." She looked at him. "What are you actually saying?" he said. She took a breath. "I'm saying," she said, "that I built something up here that I'm not leaving. And I'm saying that reading law is something I'm going to do. And I'm saying—" She stopped, steadied herself. "I'm saying that the man who told me he'd been waiting his whole life without knowing what for, I'd like him to stop waiting." Caleb looked at her across the table. The mountain outside was going about its September business. The aspens turning the air, sharpening the animals, beginning the slow preparation for what was coming. The season was ending. Another was beginning. The mountain made no distinction between them. It simply continued as it always had, holding what was built on it with the same faithful indifference it had always offered. Caleb reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held it. "I'm not a man who has much to offer in the ordinary way," he said. "I know," she said. "I don't want the ordinary way." "I have a mountain," he said, "and a cabin that was built to last, and a legal claim that's about to be the cleanest title in the Bitterroots." He looked at her hand in his. "And whatever I have, it's yours. Equal, same as the contract." "Better than the contract," she said. "Better than the contract," he agreed. She looked at their hands on the table, at the scar on her left palm from the wire fence she'd held at 14, at his hands that had built this cabin, run these lines, and held hers in the dark without asking for anything. "There's one condition," she said. He looked up. "We write it down," she said. properly, witnessed, notarized. He stared at her for exactly 1 second. Then he laughed again, that same low, genuine, bell-struck sound that she'd been carrying in her chest since the first time she heard it on the trail. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She looked at him. At this man who had come down from a mountain because the quiet had gotten too quiet, who had walked through a crowd not because he was brave, but because he was simply decided who had offered her a contract and kept it and meant everything he'd said and said only what he meant. Who had looked at her, not past her, not through her, not at the idea of her, but at her exactly as she was, and called it enough, called it more than enough, called it the thing he'd been waiting for. Emma Carter had driven a nail through a horseshoe on a July morning, and not apologized because she had stopped apologizing for the force of what she was. She had signed her name on a contract she wrote herself. She had gone up a mountain that wasn't hers, and made herself essential to it. She had fought a legal battle with a pencil and a clear mind, and the accumulated evidence of a life honestly lived. She had stood in a room full of men who wanted to define her and refused plainly and without performance to be defined. She had done all of that before she understood what she was building toward. She understood now. The hand in hers was warm and certain and not going anywhere. Neither was she. Emma Carter had come to this mountain with a contract and a reputation that a small town had decided for her, and she was leaving that version of herself somewhere below the tree line where it belonged, because the woman sitting at this table had a different name. Now, not a lesser name, not a borrowed one, but a chosen one, added to her own equal weight, equal standing. The Morgan Carter Partnership. Documented, witnessed, built to last, just like the cabin, just like everything worth keeping on this mountain, just like her.